Outside this room, Sudan is just another civil war. But we know the truth. The world is distracted by Gaza, Iran, and every headline in between. And while they look away, Sudan is being decided.
Sir, Sudan has disappeared from the headlines again. Good. As long as the cameras stay somewhere else, no one will ask what this war has really become.
What if I told you Sudan is not just fighting a civil war? What if behind Sudan's destroyed cities, starving families, and millions of displaced people, there is something much bigger happening? Not just a civil war. Gold, strategic oil routes, the Red Sea, secret foreign support, militias, weapons, and powerful countries quietly protecting their own interests. And the most shocking part is this. While one of the world's biggest humanitarian disasters is unfolding in Sudan, most of the world is barely talking about it.
So the real question is not only, why is Sudan at war?
The real questions are, who is funding this war? Who is gaining power from Sudan's collapse? Why is the Red Sea so important? And who benefits while Sudan burns?
In this video, I'm going to uncover the truth behind these questions.
And show you why Sudan's war is much bigger than most people realize. So let's go back to where Sudan's crisis really began.
What is happening in Sudan?
But to understand what is happening in Sudan today, we have to go back. Before the explosions, before the headlines, and before the world looked away.
So let's go back to where Sudan's crisis really began. After 30 years of dictatorship under Omar al-Bashir, a man wanted for genocide, the people finally rose up. Millions in the streets. They wanted democracy. They wanted freedom. And for a moment, it looked like they were going to get it. But while people were celebrating, two men were quietly dividing Sudan's power between themselves, like two wolves splitting a sheep. General Burhan, head of the Sudanese army, and General Hemeti, commander of a paramilitary force called the RSF. They smiled for cameras, they shook hands, they signed agreements. But behind closed doors, they were preparing for something very different.
But who were these two men really working for, Amand? Because it wasn't the people of Sudan.
Fighting erupted in Khartoum, Sudan's capital, almost overnight. Within hours, the presidential palace, the airport, and military bases were under fire. This wasn't a protest. This wasn't a riot. This was a full-scale war breaking out inside the capital city of a country with 48 million people. The RSF, Hemeti's forces, moved fast. They took control of neighborhoods, they entered homes, they looted hospitals. Reports of mass killings and entire districts being burned came flooding out. Within weeks, Khartoum, once a city of 6 million people, became a ghost town. Today, Sudan is living through what the United Nations calls one of the worst humanitarian disasters in human history. Over 12 million displaced, over 150,000 dead, with some estimates far higher. Famine declared in multiple regions, and entire generations of children growing up knowing nothing but war. But here's the question that changes everything. How did a paramilitary force, a militia, get powerful enough to fight an entire national army to a standstill? Because that doesn't just happen. That requires money. That requires weapons. That requires someone on the outside.
The answer points to one country, Entebbe, and it will completely change how you see this war.
Before we get to the foreign players, you need to understand one thing about Sudan that most news channels completely ignore. Sudan is sitting on one of the largest gold reserves in Africa. Sudan is the third largest gold producer on the entire continent. And for years, much of that gold has been controlled not by the government, but by Hemeti and the RSF. The RSF runs illegal and semi-legal gold mining operations across Darfur and other regions. The gold gets smuggled out, often through the UAE, and sold on international markets. No taxes, no records, no accountability. Billions of dollars flowing directly into Hemeti's war chest.
This is why the RSF doesn't need Sudan's treasury. They have their own economy.
This is why the RSF doesn't need Sudan's treasury. They have their own economy, their own income, their own financial pipeline that exists completely outside any government control. And here's where it gets darker. This gold trail leads directly to one of the world's most powerful countries.
The United Arab Emirates has denied arming the RSF, but investigative journalists, satellite imagery analysts, and UN monitors tell a very different story. Weapons traced back to UAE stockpiles have been found in RSF-controlled areas. Gold from Sudan keeps flowing through UAE markets, and throughout the war, the UAE has blocked international pressure to sanction the RSF at key diplomatic moments.
Why would the UAE care so much about a civil war in Sudan?
Because Sudan is not just a country. Sudan is a doorway to the Red Sea, a doorway to the Sahel, a doorway to Africa's resources. And whoever controls Sudan's future controls something far more valuable than just one nation. The UAE has been expanding its influence across East Africa and the Horn of Africa aggressively. Military bases, port deals, investment agreements. They are quietly building an empire of influence, and Sudan is the crown jewel. But the UAE isn't the only player at this table.
But the UAE is just one piece. What are Russia, America, and Saudi Arabia all quietly fighting over in Sudan?
The Red Sea is one of the most important waterways on planet Earth. Every single day, approximately 12% of global trade passes through it. Oil from the Gulf, consumer goods from Asia, cargo heading to Europe. All of it flows through this narrow strip of water. Sudan has over 700 kilometers of Red Sea coastline. Whoever controls Sudan's coast or gets to build ports, military installations, or logistics hubs there gets a permanent seat at the table of global trade and military power. Russia has been pursuing a naval base deal on Sudan's Red Sea coast for years. Under the transitional government, the deal was paused. Egypt is watching nervously. Sudan shares its entire southern border with Egypt. A collapsed Sudan means refugee floods, militia activity near Egyptian territory, and instability in the Nile Basin, which directly affects Egypt's water supply. Saudi Arabia is playing its own quiet game, historically aligned with the Sudanese military, worried about RSF expansion, but not ready to fully commit. And then there's the West, America and Europe, who largely stood by and watched as Sudan burned, are only now beginning to realize what they may have lost. Because while the world was distracted, the pieces on this chessboard were already moving.
Now, the most important question of this story: how the militia became an army. Let's talk about where the RSF actually came from, because this history is chilling.
The RSF evolved from the Janjaweed militias, the same forces accused of carrying out the Darfur genocide in the early 2000s. 300,000 people killed, millions displaced, villages burned. Women systematically assaulted as a weapon of war. Hemeti himself was a Janjaweed commander. The Bashir government used these militias as a tool, giving them money, weapons, and immunity in exchange for doing the regime's dirty work. Over time, Hemeti grew powerful enough to formalize the RSF, turning a death squad into a recognized paramilitary force with over 100,000 fighters. The RSF didn't just survive the fall of Bashir, they thrived. And now they are fighting, not to govern Sudan, but to prevent anyone else from governing it either. A collapsed state is actually useful, because in a collapsed state, gold keeps flowing, checkpoints keep generating cash, and no court can hold you accountable. Hemeti doesn't need to win this war.
He just needs it to never end.
This is the part that should disturb you the most. Sudan doesn't have a powerful diaspora lobbying for it in Western capitals. It doesn't have oil that Western economies directly depend on. It doesn't have a geopolitical position that forces itself onto the front pages.
So it becomes convenient to ignore. The UN Security Council has been paralyzed.
With Russia blocking meaningful action and other powers unwilling to rock the boat with their Gulf allies, peace talks in Jeddah produced no ceasefire that held. African Union mediation has stalled. And the Sudanese people, who started this whole story by demanding democracy, are now invisible in the very negotiations that will decide their future. This is how the world works when cameras aren't watching. And this is exactly why you watching this video right now matters.
Sudan is where the world's biggest powers are quietly fighting their biggest battles. And the people dying there deserve far better than our silence.
Sudan's war is not just a civil war. It is a resource war, a proxy war, a strategic war, fought over gold, over coastlines, over Red Sea access, over Africa's future, while millions of ordinary human beings pay the price with their lives, their homes, and their children's futures. The generals are funded, the foreign players are protected, the weapons keep coming, and the world keeps scrolling. So the next time someone tells you Sudan is just another African conflict, you tell them the truth. Sudan is where the world's biggest powers are quietly fighting their biggest battles, and the people dying there deserve far better than our silence.
If this video opened your eyes, share it. Because the only thing more powerful than money and weapons
is information in the right hands. Subscribe. Because next time, we go even deeper.